June 12th, 2025, just moments from landing in Ahmedabad. Air India Flight 171 disappeared from radar. A Boeing 787 Dreamliner crashed straight into a residential neighborhood near Gujarat University. 241 people on board were killed. 28 civilians on the ground also died. Only one person survived. No mayday, no time to react, just silence, then impact. This is how it unfolded. The morning of June 12th, 2025, began like many others during Gujarat's early monsoon season. Humid, overcast, and marked by a subdued haze settling over the city of Ahmedabad. On the outskirts of the city, the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport was in routine operation. Domestic and international flights moved through the terminals, continuing the rhythms of aviation that serve as daily lifelines across India. In the sky above, Air India Flight AI 171 was nearing the final leg of its long journey. The aircraft, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, had departed from Milan, Italy. The route was scheduled as a Milan-Delhi-Ahmedabad service, a known sector that typically supports a mix of international travelers, Indian nationals returning home, and passengers in transit to Western India. After a scheduled stop in Delhi for crew and passenger transition, the aircraft had resumed its final segment toward Ahmedabad. It was due to arrive shortly before midday. The aircraft was part of the Air India long-haul fleet. As a Boeing 787, it had modern avionics, composite fuselage materials, and fuel-efficient twin engines. Dreamliners are designed for comfort over long distances, and AI-171 followed a regular operational schedule on this sector. Aviation norms in India, overseen by the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, stipulate safety, weather monitoring, and air traffic control procedures consistent with global standards. On June 12th, those protocols were in effect across all relevant nodes. Ahmedabad's meteorological data from that morning recorded a cloud ceiling of moderate height with visibility sufficient for landings. Wind speeds were moderate. The air traffic control tower at Ahmedabad monitored inbound traffic as part of its regular schedule, and AI-171 was one of several aircraft expected during the late morning arrival window. There had been no recorded issues in the regional radar coverage, nor were there any weather alerts severe enough to alter incoming traffic patterns at that time. As the aircraft descended toward Ahmedabad, it entered the city's controlled airspace. At approximately 11:40 a.m. Indian Standard Time, it was on final approach. From the ground, residents in the Gujarat University area, located roughly 2 kilometers from the airport, may have observed or heard the jet in its descent phase. The area below consisted of densely packed residential blocks, commercial structures, and roadways that are typical of Midtown Ahmedabad. There had been no emergency declarations from the cockpit to the control tower. No mayday was issued. Voice transmissions recorded prior to final descent, according to later reviewed logs, reflected standard procedural communication. The aircraft had not deviated significantly from its intended approach vector. All systems, as far as was publicly known prior to the moment of impact, appeared to be following expected parameters. Flight AI-171 carried 230 passengers and 12 crew members. The onboard manifest included individuals of varied nationalities and age groups, families, business travelers, students, and Air India personnel were among those seated. At seat 11A, near the front of the economy section, sat a man later identified as Vishwashkumar Ramesh, who had boarded the aircraft in Milan. His seat placement would later prove significant. At the time of the aircraft's final descent, nothing from the public data suggested abnormal technical activity. The aircraft was under the control of its assigned pilots, who had filed a routine flight plan and had received approach clearance from Ahmedabad ATC. Approach charts for runway 23 were active. Weather data remained within acceptable margins. Other aircraft in the vicinity had landed or were in holding patterns as scheduled. AI-171's vector placed it in the path over western Ahmedabad, where it would ordinarily make a southwesterly descent into the airport corridor. The flight was expected to touch down minutes before noon. In the cockpit, the crew would have been monitoring instruments, reducing altitude, adjusting thrust, and preparing the landing checklist. The Dreamliner cockpit is equipped with fly-by-wire controls, head-up displays, and automated landing assistance systems. In accordance with international aviation standards, pilots receive regular training on manual and automatic descent protocols. Air India follows these standards under DGCA oversight. At street level, the day proceeded with its usual activity. Schools and shops were open. Traffic moved through the intersections near Gujarat University and the Navrangpura area. There had been no indication to the city or its residents of any irregularity in the skies above. As the time reached 11:47 a.m., the aircraft crossed into the final kilometers of its descent. Altitude data, later retrieved from radar logs and corroborated by onboard recording devices, showed the aircraft descending in line with its projected glide path. Until the final seconds, there was no forewarning. There was no alert made public before the event. At 11:48 a.m. Indian Standard Time, Air India flight AI-171 crashed into a residential sector near Gujarat University. The site was just under 2 kilometers from the airport's primary runway. The impact occurred in an urban neighborhood with mid-rise apartment buildings, narrow internal streets, and local shops. In the minutes that followed, the silence of the city was interrupted by the first signs of emergency: distant sounds, smoke, and the appearance of debris. But in the sky above, there was no longer any trace of Flight AI-171. Its approach had ended in a moment that marked the beginning of an unfolding tragedy. At exactly 11:48 a.m. Indian Standard Time, on June 12, 2025, Air India Flight AI-171 impacted the ground in a densely populated residential neighborhood located near Gujarat University in Ahmedabad. The crash site lay approximately 2 kilometers from the threshold of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport's primary runway. The aircraft, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, was on final approach. It had completed the Milan-Delhi-Ahmedabad route as scheduled and had been descending under normal air traffic control guidance. No emergency was declared prior to impact. Air traffic control did not receive any distress call from the cockpit. The moment of impact was abrupt and catastrophic. The aircraft struck the ground in a built-up area with multiple residential buildings, narrow streets, and commercial units. It was late morning, and local activity was ongoing. The force of the collision caused a massive structural breakup of the airframe upon contact. The forward fuselage, including the cockpit and forward passenger compartments, experienced immediate and total disintegration. The central fuselage section broke apart in multiple directions. The wings, carrying large volumes of fuel, ruptured and ignited. Fires began within seconds. Residents in the area reported hearing a sharp, percussive sound, followed almost instantly by flames and dense black smoke. Surveillance footage and mobile phone recordings confirmed that the aircraft came down without warning. The tail section was among the few visible parts of the airframe that remained partially intact. though it too was heavily damaged and consumed by fire in the minutes that followed. The crash scattered wreckage across a wide radius. Debris spread through narrow alleyways, onto rooftops, and into nearby roadways. Several residential buildings sustained direct impact damage. Vehicles in the vicinity were crushed, burned, or overturned. Fires broke out in adjacent homes. Structural collapses occurred. The resulting damage created an environment of confusion, dust, and extreme heat. From initial visual assessment and satellite imaging reviewed after the event, the impact site covered a concentrated zone of destruction approximately 200 meters in diameter. Smoke rose visibly from the crash zone and was observable across a wide section of western Ahmedabad. Of the 242 individuals on board, 230 passengers and 12 crew, 241 perished on impact or in the immediate aftermath. Only one person, seated in 11A, survived. Ground fatalities were later confirmed to be at least 28, though that number was subject to review pending further identification efforts. There were multiple points of ignition across the wreckage field. Fuel from the aircraft's tanks contributed to sustained fires that burned in both open and enclosed spaces. Fire and smoke spread into adjacent buildings, many of which were occupied at the time. Secondary explosions, likely from compromised fuel systems and pressure vessels, were reported by residents and later confirmed by first responders. The area around Gujarat University is heavily populated and features mixed-use structures. Many civilians in the impact area were caught unaware. Power lines were severed. Communications infrastructure in the immediate area was disrupted. Water pipelines were damaged, making it difficult for local residents to assist in firefighting efforts. Within the first minute after the crash, the city's emergency services began receiving multiple calls. The 108 emergency line logged over 300 calls in the first 5 minutes. Local police stations and the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation control room registered continuous alerts. At the crash site itself, the environment was unrecognizable within minutes. The aircraft was no longer visible as a single structure. Its components had fragmented and were burning. Civilian video taken from nearby rooftops showed columns of smoke rising rapidly, with flames engulfing large portions of buildings and debris. The air was filled with particulate ash, and visibility near the core of the site was near zero. Emergency responders arriving at the site would later describe the scene as total structural collapse with active fire. Firefighters had to navigate narrow roads blocked by debris and panicked civilians. The situation remained uncontrolled for several minutes due to the sheer scale of destruction and difficulty in access. From a technical perspective, the descent had been unremarkable until the final moments. Radar data later released by the Ministry of Civil Aviation showed a rapid loss of altitude in the last 30 seconds of flight. That data, combined with the eventual recovery of the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder, was sent for analysis. No initial conclusions were drawn publicly in the hours following the crash. The Dreamliner was equipped with an advanced avionics suite, including terrain avoidance systems, autopilot protocols, and a reinforced cockpit. However, none of these systems could prevent the result of what occurred in the final descent path. Whether due to mechanical failure, pilot input, or other factors, the aircraft descended below its safe approach corridor and made uncontrolled contact with the ground. The exact coordinates of the primary impact were logged by National Disaster Response Force (NDRF) teams as being inside a cluster of buildings bounded by University Road to the east and Commerce 6 Road to the west. The zone of impact fell within a radius of 700 meters from Gujarat University's perimeter and less than 2 kilometers from the edge of runway 23. No part of the aircraft remained in a flyable condition. Landing gear, engines, and wings were separated from the fuselage and scattered across multiple points. The cockpit section was destroyed entirely. The time from final approach to total impact was estimated at less than 90 seconds from the final radar transmission. The force of the collision and the ensuing fires made recovery of bodies, materials, and flight equipment extremely difficult in the initial hours. For those on board, there was no opportunity to react. The impact was sudden and final. On the ground, families were displaced, buildings were left structurally unsound, and dozens of people were killed or injured. The area would remain cordoned off for the remainder of the day, as emergency teams began search, rescue, and damage containment efforts. This was one of the worst air disasters in Indian civil aviation history. Its full consequences would only become apparent in the hours and days that followed. At 11:48 a.m. on June 12, 2025, Air India Flight A, I-171, crashed in the heart of Ahmedabad's urban zone. In the first moments after the crash, there was no official confirmation of what had happened, only the overwhelming signs of a catastrophic event, a low, thunderous sound, followed by flames, rising smoke, and the collapse of structures in a concentrated radius around Gujarat University. Within 1 minute of the crash, emergency phone lines began receiving calls. Bystanders near the University Road and Commerce 6 Road intersection reported hearing a loud impact, seeing fire, and witnessing debris scattered across rooftops and streets. Within 3 minutes, Ahmedabad's Municipal Emergency Control Room had initiated its highest level of alert. The first wave of responders came from the Ahmedabad Fire and Emergency Services. Units stationed in Navrangpura, Paldi, and Shahibaug were dispatched. The fire brigade arrived at the perimeter of the crash zone approximately 9 minutes after the incident. Due to the dense construction in the area, narrow roadways, and the presence of debris, immediate access to the epicenter of the crash was delayed. The fire teams encountered active fires spanning multiple buildings and open-air wreckage. The aircraft's fuel, spread across a wide area, had ignited secondary blazes in parked vehicles, nearby homes, and overhead electrical lines. Dense smoke reduced visibility. Flames were spreading rapidly through collapsed structures where civilians were still trapped inside. The National Disaster Response Force, NDRF, deployed teams from its 6th Battalion, based in Gandhinagar. The first NDRF units arrived shortly after noon. Their immediate priority was to secure the site perimeter, prevent further casualties, and assess areas where survivors might still be found. Thermal imaging, search cameras, and rescue canines were used to locate trapped individuals. Police units from the Gujarat Police and Ahmedabad City Police were among the first to set up outer cordons. Crowd control became critical as civilians, some injured, others in search of loved ones, attempted to reach the site. Officers directed bystanders away from dangerous areas and worked with fire and rescue teams to evacuate homes at risk of fire spread or structural collapse. Ambulances from both government and private hospitals were dispatched, including units from Civil Hospital Ahmedabad, Sterling Hospital, and SAL Hospital. Inbound roads toward Gujarat University were blocked for civilian traffic and converted to emergency corridors. Medical teams prepared for burn victims, trauma cases, and critical care needs. All available beds in emergency departments were activated under mass casualty protocol. Within the first hour, Civil Hospital Ahmedabad had received multiple victims from the crash site, including the only confirmed survivor from the aircraft, Vishwashkumar Ramesh. Emergency medical staff confirmed that he was conscious and had been pulled from the wreckage by local residents before the arrival of formal rescue teams. He was treated for burns and trauma and admitted under intensive care. For most of the 241 on board who perished, there was little that could be done on scene. The impact and subsequent fires had rendered large parts of the aircraft's fuselage unrecognizable. First responders, including paramedics and police, began the process of body recovery, but this task was hindered by fire, heat, and ongoing structural instability in the area. Rescue operations were further complicated by intermittent explosions in the debris field, likely caused by residual fuel, pressurized cabin elements, or compromised utility infrastructure. Firefighters used foam suppression systems to control fuel fires and prevent flare-ups near gas lines. In areas with collapsed walls and roofing, NDRF teams used cutting tools and hydraulic spreaders to extract bodies and search for survivors. The Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority, GSDMA, activated its Emergency Coordination Unit. An incident command post was established at a safe distance from the crash site where fire, police, and health officials coordinated their operations. The municipal commissioner of Ahmedabad, along with district officials, visited the scene by early afternoon. Updates were relayed to the Gujarat Chief Minister's office and the Central Ministry of Civil Aviation. By 1 p.m., aerial footage from police drones and media helicopters showed the full extent of the damage. A deep impact crater marked the central collision point. The tail section of the aircraft had collapsed into a housing block. The right engine was found detached and embedded in an adjacent rooftop. Portions of the aircraft's internal structure, including cabin seats, overhead bins, and paneling, were strewn across the debris zone. Civilian casualties on the ground were confirmed by early afternoon. At least 28 people who had not been on the aircraft were killed in the immediate blast zone or from injuries sustained during the collapse of nearby structures. Dozens more were injured, many requiring hospitalization for burns, fractures, and respiratory trauma caused by inhalation of toxic smoke. Power outages occurred in the surrounding sectors. Emergency generators were brought in to maintain communication and lighting as operations continued into the late afternoon. Gas lines in the crash vicinity were sealed off by municipal engineers to prevent further risk of explosion. Eyewitness accounts taken by police and reporters described scenes of intense heat, rapid fire spread, and disoriented survivors wandering the street. Many residents attempted to assist in rescue efforts before formal teams arrived. Some pulled victims from burning buildings. Others carried buckets of water in an effort to suppress flames. Several of these civilian rescuers were injured and later treated by emergency services. By 3 p.m., the situation was partially stabilized. Fires had been brought under control in most areas. The majority of victims had been removed from immediate danger zones. Recovery of bodies from the wreckage had begun under the supervision of NDRF and fire teams wearing full protective gear. Forensic identification of remains would continue for days. At the airport, operations were briefly suspended. Incoming flights were diverted to nearby cities, including Vadodara and Mumbai. Security was heightened across aviation hubs nationwide as a precaution. The Directorate General of Civil Aviation initiated formal incident response protocols, and preliminary investigation teams were briefed. At the site of the crash, silence began to return by late afternoon. Smoke still rose from hot spots. The sound of generators, sirens, and two-way radios replaced the earlier chaos. Emergency teams worked into the evening under floodlights, documenting the scene, recovering remains, and ensuring the area was secure. Families of passengers began arriving at Civil Hospital and at the airport, where Air India set up assistance counters. Confirmed names of the deceased were not yet available, pending identification. psychological support teams were mobilized by local NGOs and state agencies. By nightfall on June 12th, the city had begun to grasp the full scale of the tragedy. The response, though immediate and coordinated, faced overwhelming conditions. But every action taken, from the first fire engine dispatched to the final body recovered that night, was aimed at limiting suffering, preserving evidence, and honoring those lost. Of the 242 people aboard Air India Flight AI-171, 241 perished in the crash. One individual, Vishwashkumar Ramesh, seated in 11A, survived. The confirmation of a single survivor emerged gradually through statements issued by Civil Hospital Ahmedabad and verified by the Gujarat government's Disaster Response Office. According to official briefings, Mr. Ramesh had been recovered alive from the aircraft's wreckage shortly after the initial fires were brought under partial control. His condition was classified as critical but stable within hours of hospitalization. Mr. Ramesh had been traveling alone. He held a confirmed seat in the forward economy section of the aircraft on the left side. The specific mechanism of his survival has not been fully disclosed, and no official conclusions have been published by the Air Accident Investigation Bureau. However, officials confirmed that his location within the aircraft placed him near an emergency exit over the wing. Firefighters and civilian rescuers found him near a partially collapsed section of the fuselage. He was able to move when located, although severely injured. Early hospital reports stated that he had sustained multiple contusions, soft tissue trauma, and inhalation-related complications, but he was conscious when brought into the emergency ward. Doctors at Civil Hospital administered immediate treatment and transferred him to the intensive care unit under guarded observation. In the first official communication regarding his survival, Civil Hospital released a short medical bulletin that read, "Male patient, mid-30s, rescued from wreckage of AI-171, in ICU, vital signs present, responsive to stimuli, further evaluation ongoing." No interviews were permitted, and access to Mr. Ramesh was restricted to medical staff and authorized personnel only. His survival was confirmed in the presence of law enforcement and disaster recovery officials. Forensic teams verified his boarding pass, seat number, and identification against the flight manifest. Air India representatives visited the hospital to begin formal survivor assistance protocols. Mr. Ramesh's family was notified through coordinated communication between hospital administration and Gujarat state officials. He remains, as of the latest available public data, the only person to have survived the crash of Air India Flight AI-171. At the site of the crash, conditions remained hazardous well into the evening of June 12th. The aircraft, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, had been disassembled by impact. The central fuselage was destroyed. Sections of the wing had fragmented into narrow roads, with large metallic parts embedded into concrete and masonry. The right engine had separated entirely, landing atop a 2-story residential unit that was partially consumed by fire. Much of the debris was not immediately identifiable. Seat frames, oxygen masks, overhead panels, and luggage compartments had been either vaporized in the fire or deformed beyond recognition. Charred fragments of cabin flooring and metallic elements littered courtyards, terraces, and alleyways. The outer frame of the tail fin was partially visible in early aerial footage. Painted in Air India's traditional red and white livery, it was one of the few recognizable parts of the aircraft. However, even this section had been compromised by heat and structural strain. NDRF teams marked debris zones with colored flags to assist in mapping. Each flag indicated the presence of body remains, technical components, or hazardous materials. Forensic documentation began almost immediately, with each find being photographed, tagged, and recorded before removal. The area had no single crater, but rather a spread of destruction across multiple impact points. The initial contact likely occurred at a downward angle, with the aircraft's forward section hitting a rooftop and then breaking apart through two adjacent buildings before skidding and disintegrating over the next 100 meters. Burn patterns showed multiple origins, confirming that fires started in several locations at once. Fuel from the wings spilled into open courtyards and road surfaces, where it ignited on contact with hot engine components. The heat generated melted portions of nearby metal fencing and distorted window grills in surrounding buildings. Local residents described the area as unrecognizable. Entire facades of buildings had collapsed inward. Ceiling fans, concrete beams, and personal items were visible in the debris, along with torn pages of documents, charred photographs, and the remains of household furniture. The scene was one of total structural failure, compounded by fire. Many of the deceased civilians on the ground were recovered from inside their homes. In some cases, the buildings had shielded them from direct fire, but collapsed walls and beams caused fatal injuries. Others were exposed to immediate explosions or fires in the lanes where they had been walking, driving, or conducting daily business. Disaster response teams used handheld search devices and gas detectors to locate heat signatures and detect trapped air pockets. Excavation was done manually in many locations to avoid secondary collapse or harm to undiscovered individuals. The work was slow, deliberate, and continuous. Every body recovered was covered respectfully and transported under police escort to designated morgue facilities. Identification was carried out under Gujarat state forensic protocols, which included dental records, personal belongings, and DNA matching in cases where standard visual ID was not possible. The aircraft's black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the flight data recorder, FDR, were located late in the evening. According to an official statement from the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, both devices were recovered in damaged but intact condition and secured by AAIB investigators for transport to a secure analysis facility. Meanwhile, power had not yet been restored to the entire area. Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation teams worked alongside utility engineers to cut gas and electricity lines where needed. The site remained cordoned off, with inner and outer zones controlled by police and NDRF teams. Entry was permitted only to emergency personnel and authorized investigators. By midnight, the active fires had been extinguished, though embers still smoldered. The air was heavy with moisture and chemical residue from fire suppression foam. Teams rotated shifts as recovery continued through the night. The presence of the survivor, Vishwashkumar Ramesh, added a new dimension to the scene. While the loss was nearly total, the existence of a living individual from inside the aircraft confirmed the urgency and value of every rescue operation undertaken in those first hours. His survival was treated with dignity, privacy, and medical urgency, not as spectacle, but as a singular fact amid mass tragedy. In the following days, further steps would be taken to identify the deceased, stabilize the site, and begin a formal investigation. But on June 12th, the priority remained clear: recovering those lost, supporting the injured, and preserving the evidence necessary to understand what had gone wrong. By the evening of June 12th, 2025, the full scale of the human loss from Air India flight AI-171 was beginning to emerge. Official confirmations proceeded with caution. No names were released publicly until each had been verified through multiple channels. The focus in those first hours was on stabilizing survivors where possible, recovering the deceased with dignity, and coordinating the efforts of medical institutions across Ahmedabad. The total number of people on board the aircraft was 242, consisting of 230 passengers and 12 crew members. By late afternoon, 241 fatalities among those on board had been confirmed by Civil Hospital Ahmedabad and the Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority, GSDMA. The sole survivor remained Vishwashkumar Ramesh, seated in 11A, who was being treated under intensive care. The crash also resulted in significant civilian casualties on the ground. At least 28 confirmed fatalities were reported among residents in the affected area. This number was communicated by Ahmedabad police during a press briefing held at 8 p.m. local time, though officials acknowledged that the figure might rise as further bodies were recovered from collapsed structures and debris. Casualties on the ground included individuals of varying ages, including children, elderly persons, and workers in residential and commercial buildings. At the time of the crash, the area surrounding Gujarat University was active. It was a weekday, late morning. People were in transit, shops were open, and nearby schools and offices were operating. In total, dozens more civilians were injured, ranging from minor lacerations and smoke inhalation to severe burn injuries and blunt force trauma from falling masonry and debris. The numbers varied across institutions, but combined figures across Civil Hospital, Sterling Hospital, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel Institute of Medical Sciences, and SL Hospital indicated over 60 injured civilians were treated within the first 12 hours following the crash. Civil Hospital Ahmedabad, the largest public medical facility in the region, was the primary coordination center for emergency medical response. Its emergency trauma units activated a mass casualty protocol at 12:07 p.m., less than 20 minutes after the crash. Multiple operating theaters were made available. Additional medical staff were recalled from off-duty status, and ward space was cleared to accommodate incoming patients. Ambulances, both from the hospital's own fleet and those dispatched via Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation and private emergency services, began arriving in waves. Triage areas were set up outside the main emergency entrance to assess victims before admission. Volunteers and local NGOs arrived by mid-afternoon to assist in coordination, provide logistical support, and offer water, food, and basic supplies. Sterling Hospital, a major private hospital in the city, also received a number of injured civilians, particularly those from the surrounding neighborhoods. Its burn unit and ICU were activated under surge conditions. Families of the injured began arriving by late afternoon, with hospital security managing the flow of relatives seeking updates and identification. Injured victims were assigned identifiers if unaccompanied, and photographs of personal effects, such as watches, jewelry, or phones, were used by medical staff and police to assist in establishing identities. Gujarat state health authorities confirmed that DNA samples were collected in cases where victims were unconscious and lacked documentation. The morgue at Civil Hospital Ahmedabad became the central facility for processing the deceased. Refrigerated storage units were activated and additional capacity was arranged. Forensic teams conducted initial examinations, recorded clothing, personal effects, and distinguishing physical features. In many cases, bodies were damaged by fire or structural impact, requiring advanced identification methods. DNA kits were flown in from regional forensic centers in Gandhinagar and Mumbai. The Ahmedabad Forensic Science Laboratory dispatched a team to assist in documentation and identification. Officials confirmed that all deceased passengers and crew members would undergo fingerprinting, dental comparisons, and DNA analysis where necessary. Coordination with families began as soon as identities were verified. Grief counselors and support staff were present at Civil Hospital to accompany families during the viewing and claim process. A separate team of police officers, trained in victim support, was assigned to work directly with relatives. Each interaction was recorded for official documentation. Legal next of kin confirmation was required before any body could be released. In cases involving non-residents or foreign nationals, the Ministry of External Affairs was notified and tasked with liaising with consulates and embassies. Air India established a family assistance center at the Ahmedabad airport and dispatched representatives to each hospital. The airline confirmed the activation of its standard post-accident support structure, which includes providing immediate financial assistance for victim families, travel arrangements for relatives, and dedicated case managers for identification and repatriation processes. The Gujarat government declared an emergency health alert across the city. All non-urgent surgeries in public hospitals were postponed, and additional medical supplies, IV fluids, analgesics, burn dressings, and oxygen cylinders were distributed to frontline institutions. Blood banks received public appeals for donations, and collection centers were opened at major hospitals. While many victims on board the aircraft were beyond the reach of medical intervention due to the nature of the impact, every effort was made to ensure that all recovered bodies were handled with respect and professional care. Each was logged, covered, and transported by authorized personnel. Religious and cultural considerations were observed in coordination with local representatives once identities were confirmed. In parallel, Ahmedabad police began compiling the official casualty list. This process was done manually, line by line, through confirmation of seating charts, recovery tags, and hospital records. Each entry included name, gender, age, where available, seat number, if on board, and the date and time of formal confirmation of death. This document was submitted to the Ministry of Civil Aviation and the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA. No speculations were made in official communication. Every name was released only after confirmed verification. Public announcements regarding the deceased began in the early hours of June 13th, starting with victims whose families had been notified and had identified the remains. Psychological support units from local universities and national agencies were deployed to multiple hospitals. Counselors worked with both families of victims and first responders, many of whom had been exposed to traumatic scenes. The Gujarat State Mental Health Authority confirmed the launch of a long-term counseling and trauma support initiative for survivors and relatives. By the end of June 12th, the city's medical infrastructure had treated and documented over 90 individuals connected to the crash. Between the injured, the deceased, and those suffering from shock or secondary health impacts, the work was not over. Recovery continued overnight. Many of the injured remained in critical condition. Hospitals issued hourly bulletins, coordinated with Air India, and shared updates with the State Disaster Control Center. No hospital exceeded capacity due to rapid interagency coordination and prioritization of treatment. One survivor remained in care. Families gathered at morgues and hospital corridors. Emergency lighting kept the city's trauma centers operational through the night. The air inside the hospitals remained tense and quiet, marked not by chaos, but by methodical attention to every name, every face, and every life impacted by the disaster. In the hours following the crash of Air India Flight A, I-171, on the morning of June 12, 2025, the immediate priority remained rescue and medical response. But as the fires were controlled and the site secured, the process of investigation formally began. Aviation accidents of this magnitude require a coordinated response between regulatory bodies, forensic teams, manufacturers, and international observers. In India, this responsibility lies primarily with the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, AAIB. At 3:45 p.m. Indian Standard Time on June 12th, the Ministry of Civil Aviation announced that a full-scale investigation had been initiated under the Aircraft Investigation of Accidents and Incidents Rules 2017. The AAIB, operating under the ministry, dispatched a team of senior investigators and forensic aviation experts from its Delhi headquarters to the crash site in Ahmedabad. Their arrival was coordinated through Gujarat's State Disaster Control Room. Preliminary steps began with a site survey done alongside officers from the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, and the National Disaster Response Force, NDRF. Visual documentation was prioritized: aerial drone imaging, ground-based photography, and mapping of impact scatter zones. Nothing was to be disturbed before detailed records were made. By 5:30 p.m., search and recovery teams located the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the flight data recorder, FDR, collectively known as the black boxes. They were found in the rear section of the debris field, embedded under collapsed fuselage material, but were recovered with their casing intact. A statement issued jointly by the DGCA and AAIB later confirmed that both units were externally damaged, but believed to be internally intact. They were placed into protective containers and removed under sealed custody by AAIB officials. The recorders were subsequently flown under secure protocol to Delhi, where they were transferred to the AAIB's Central Analysis Facility. The data within these recorders would be critical in reconstructing the final minutes of the flight, capturing cockpit conversations, instrument readings, and control surface positions during descent and impact. The involvement of Boeing, the aircraft manufacturer, was confirmed on the same evening. A team of technical experts from Boeing's Seattle office was scheduled to arrive in India within 36 hours of the crash. This is in line with international aviation standards under the Chicago Convention on International Civil Aviation, which requires the participation of the manufacturer in any serious incident involving their aircraft. Additionally, the United States National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, was notified as per protocol, given the aircraft's country of manufacture. NTSB observers were invited to join the Indian-led investigation, with their participation focused on technical and safety aspects rather than regulatory findings. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, was also formally informed. The aircraft involved in the crash was a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, a wide-body twin-engine jet that had been in commercial service globally since 2011. The specific unit used for Flight AI-171 had been delivered to Air India in 2018 and had reportedly undergone routine maintenance checks, including a C-check in late 2024, as confirmed by a spokesperson for Air India during a press briefing on June 13th. The aircraft had completed the first leg of its journey from Milan Malpensa Airport, MXP, to Delhi Indira Gandhi International Airport, DEL, without reported incident. The onward segment from Delhi to Ahmedabad, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport AMD, had taken off as scheduled. No weather alerts were in effect at the time of approach. ATC Communications recorded no declared emergency. To preserve the integrity of the investigation, airspace records, flight plans, and ATC transcripts were collected. Ahmedabad ATC radar logs were downloaded and backed up, along with audio files capturing the final approach of AI-171. These would be correlated with the data from the black boxes to reconstruct the aircraft's path. On June 13th, the DGCA announced the temporary grounding of 3 Boeing 787 aircraft within Air India's fleet for safety inspections. These inspections were described as precautionary and not indicative of immediate systemic fault. The rest of the airline's Dreamliner fleet continued operation under intensified monitoring. Security at the crash site was formally transferred from police to the AAIB on June 13th, under special jurisdiction rules governing accident scenes. An inner perimeter was maintained around the core fuselage zone, where high-value evidence, such as flight control components and avionics, was being recovered. Items were tagged, documented, and moved under chain of custody protocols to secure storage. Residents from adjacent buildings were evacuated for safety and to protect the scene. Structural engineers from Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation examined the stability of buildings near the impact zone, and all public access remained blocked. Temporary shelters were arranged for displaced residents. The Ministry of Civil Aviation also confirmed that no threat indicators, such as hijack signals, known technical alerts, or distress calls, had been recorded prior to impact. This fact, combined with the nature of the crash, placed increased scrutiny on mechanical, structural, and procedural elements of the flight. Initial analysis of the crash pattern suggested a high-angle, high-speed descent at the time of impact, but no definitive cause or contributing factor was identified in the first 48 hours. AAIB officials emphasized that no conclusions would be drawn until data from the black boxes had been decoded and correlated with physical evidence. A public appeal was issued by the Ministry of Civil Aviation on June 13th for eyewitness footage, dashboard camera recordings, and CCTV video from areas around Gujarat University to aid in the reconstruction of the aircraft's final descent. The Prime Minister's office, in coordination with the Ministry of Home Affairs, established a task group to support the investigation logistically and ensure the availability of resources. This task group was composed of representatives from civil aviation, home affairs, public health, and the Gujarat state government. A no-fly zone remained in effect over the crash area for 72 hours. Local flight paths were adjusted, and air traffic into Ahmedabad was rerouted during that period to avoid interfering with recovery operations. As of the end of June 13th, the AAIB had secured physical evidence from the crash site, received initial metadata from the FDR, and had begun transcriptions of cockpit audio. All international observers were briefed, and Air India had provided full cooperation, including access to maintenance records, pilot rosters, and training history. No public statement regarding probable cause was issued at that time. The AAIB confirmed that a preliminary report would be made public within 30 days, with a full final report to follow after thorough analysis. Until then, only confirmed facts would be communicated. No speculation, no assumption. Every detail would be traced to data. For now, the task remained clear: collect, preserve, analyze, and explain, so that the lives lost on June 12th would not be forgotten, and so that future tragedies might be prevented. By the morning of June 13th, 2025, the impact of the Air India flight AI-171 crash had spread across India and beyond. What had begun as a focused emergency response in a single city now occupied the full attention of the nation. As casualty numbers were confirmed and investigation efforts deepened, the government of India shifted into the second phase of its response: national mourning, public acknowledgement, and coordinated support for those affected. At 9:15 a.m. Indian Standard Time on June 13th, the Prime Minister's office released an official statement. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who was born in Gujarat and maintains personal ties to the region, expressed deep condolences to the families of the victims. His statement read, "The loss of lives in the tragic crash of Air India, Flight AI-171, is a matter of profound sorrow for the entire nation. My thoughts are with the families who have lost their loved ones. The Government of India stands with them in this hour of grief. All possible support will be extended to the injured and to those affected on the ground." Later that morning, the Prime Minister held a high-level review meeting with officials from the Ministry of Civil Aviation, Ministry of Home Affairs, and Gujarat state authorities. He directed the Union Health Ministry and the National Disaster Management Authority to continue extended support operations in Ahmedabad. Special instructions were issued to expedite identification processes and deliver timely assistance to families. At 10:30 a.m. Indian Standard Time, Minister of Civil Aviation Jyotiraditya Scindia addressed a press conference from New Delhi. His remarks were brief, factual, and focused entirely on transparency and accountability. He confirmed that the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, AIB, was operating with full independence, and that no information would be withheld from the public once verified. "This is one of the gravest air tragedies in India's recent history," he stated. "We mourn the loss of 241 lives on board and over 24 civilians on the ground. Our ministry is coordinating with all relevant agencies, and we will continue to ensure that the process remains fully transparent. The families of victims will receive the utmost support and respect." The Government of India declared a one-day national mourning on June 13, 2025. The decision was communicated through the Ministry of Home Affairs. As per standard protocol, this entailed all government buildings flying the national flag at half-mast across the country. No official entertainment or celebratory events permitted. Government functions adjusted to observe silence and reflection. In Gujarat, the state government led by Chief Minister Bhupendra Patel declared a state-level mourning period of 2 days with immediate effect. Government offices remained operational but subdued. Across Ahmedabad, flags were lowered. Public events, including cultural programs and educational activities, were either canceled or postponed. In the Gujarat University area, near the crash site, a temporary memorial zone was created by the local municipal corporation. Flowers, candles, and handwritten notes began appearing at the police barricades and nearby sidewalks. People gathered quietly. No speeches were made. Local police maintained a respectful distance to ensure order without interfering in expressions of grief. Religious institutions responded across denominations. Hindu temples, mosques, churches, and gurdwaras in Ahmedabad and across India held special prayers. In Dwarka, Somnath, and Ambaji, major pilgrimage sites in Gujarat, bells were silenced, and priests led non-denominational chants for the deceased. In Jama Masjid Ahmedabad, the Friday afternoon prayer included specific mention of the victims, with an appeal for peace and strength to the families. Schools in Ahmedabad observed a minute of silence. Students were informed in age-appropriate terms. Several schools near Gujarat University, whose students had lost family members in the crash, suspended classes for the day. Teachers were instructed to be available for psychological support and early counseling. International condolences began to arrive by midday. The President of Italy, Sergio Mattarella, extended formal condolences given that the flight originated in Milan. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency, EASA, also issued a public statement expressing solidarity with Indian authorities and readiness to assist if requested. Airlines and aviation regulators from several countries conveyed their sympathies. Air India's headquarters in Delhi issued its own statement on the morning of June 13th. We are deeply saddened by the tragic loss of Flight AY171. Our entire organization stands in solidarity with the families of those who lost their lives. We are working in close coordination with government agencies to support the investigation and provide assistance to the families. We will leave no effort spared in ensuring dignity, clarity, and support in this difficult time. All Air India offices, both in India and abroad, observed 2 minutes of silence at noon local time. At Milan Malpensa Airport, MXP, a candlelight vigil was held near the departure terminal for AI-171. Airport staff, passengers, and Indian consulate officials stood in silence. A temporary message board was placed for condolences. In Delhi, an interfaith prayer service was held near Terminal 3 of Indira Gandhi International Airport, attended by Air India staff, ministry officials, and family members. Photographs of some of the victims, including crew members, were placed on easels surrounded by marigold and white rose arrangements. No speeches were given. A harmonium and tabla played a slow instrumental rendition of Vaishnava Janto, followed by silence. At the crash site in Ahmedabad, recovery operations paused briefly during the national mourning observance. AAIB and NDRF teams observed a 1-minute silence at 11:48 a.m., marking 24 hours since the time of impact. The moment was coordinated with Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation and broadcast internally via rescue communications. By the end of June 13th, condolence messages from multiple political leaders, religious heads, civil society groups, and the public continued to circulate. Hashtags expressing solidarity appeared across social media platforms, but authorities avoided drawing attention to speculation or unofficial commentary. Verified facts and formal notices remained the core channel for communication. No memorial service had been announced as of that day. Officials stated that any such observance would take place only after all bodies were identified and families had been consulted. Mourning did not end with the day's close. In many homes, it was just beginning. The task of returning the deceased to their families across cities, states, and international borders would require coordination, time, and care. But in public, the Republic of India had formally acknowledged the loss. On June 13th, a country of over 1.4 billion paused quietly to remember 241 lives aboard a plane that never completed its final landing, and the civilians who were lost on the ground below. The day after the crash of Air India Flight AI-171, the investigation process moved beyond emergency response and into a deeper technical phase. Aviation accidents involving large commercial aircraft are rare, and when they occur, they trigger rigorous multi-agency reviews of both immediate causes and broader systemic risks. On June 13, 2025, the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, AIB, confirmed that the Flight Data Recorder, FDR, and Cockpit Voice Recorder, CVR, retrieved from the wreckage had been secured in Delhi. A preliminary technical inspection showed that the units, though externally deformed, were sufficiently intact for data extraction. The process of downloading, decoding, and transcribing these units began within hours of their arrival. Investigators, led by AAIB personnel, worked in parallel with technical observers from Boeing and the United States National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, both of whom had accepted invitations to participate. A core question emerged early in the process. Was the crash the result of a rare, isolated failure, or did it reveal a deeper issue with the aircraft type, operations, or maintenance? Flight AI-171 was operated using a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, a long-haul twin-engine aircraft first introduced into commercial service in 2011. The specific airframe involved in the accident had been delivered to Air India in March 2018, according to the airline's confirmed fleet records. By the time of the crash, it had completed approximately 21,400 flight hours over more than 5,300 cycles. Boeing 787s are equipped with advanced composite materials, fly-by-wire systems, and sophisticated avionics. As part of India's broader civil aviation modernization, the Dreamliner fleet was seen as a flagship long-haul platform. Air India operated multiple 787s across intercontinental routes, including services to Europe, North America, and the Gulf. According to statements issued by Air India, the aircraft involved in Flight AI-171 underwent its last C-check, a comprehensive maintenance overhaul, at an approved facility in Hyderabad in November 2024. The records from this inspection, which were submitted to the Directorate General of Civil Aviation, DGCA, after the crash, showed no major airframe or engine issues requiring deferred attention. Routine line checks had also been conducted before the Milan-Delhi-Ahmedabad flight, as per Air India protocols. The airline confirmed that no abnormalities were recorded during pre-departure checks at Malpensa Airport, nor during the stopover in Delhi. The two General Electric Gen X-1B engines installed on the aircraft had recorded standard operational data during the Milan to Delhi segment, with no signs of temperature or vibration anomalies. However, engine performance in the final approach phase to Ahmedabad remained under review, pending full analysis of FDR data. In response to the crash, the DGCA initiated a fleet-wide technical audit of all Boeing 787s operated by Indian carriers. This included inspection of airframe integrity, with a focus on structural components near the forward fuselage, examination of flight control systems, particularly elevator and rudder response patterns, evaluation of electronic control units and their recent software updates, review of recent airworthiness directives, ADs and compliance logs for each aircraft. The audit was conducted in collaboration with Boeing field engineers based in India, with remote support from Seattle. Special emphasis was placed on determining whether any shared vulnerabilities existed across the fleet. The AAIB did not release detailed findings in the first days after the crash. However, a briefing note shared confirmed that investigators were examining altitude and airspeed trends during descent, thrust commands and engine response from 10,000 feet until impact, flight crew inputs on the control column and rudder pedals, configuration of flaps and landing gear, weather radar and wind shear detection systems. Based on confirmed ATC logs, there was no declared emergency or deviation request from Flight AI-171 prior to the crash. Radar data showed a standard approach pattern until approximately 3 nautical miles from runway 23 at Ahmedabad, where a rapid altitude loss was observed. The exact reason for this has not been disclosed pending final analysis. As a secondary safety measure, the DGCA issued a notice to airmen, NOTAM, requesting all Indian carriers to review crew training modules related to non-normal approach scenarios, go-around decisions, and automated system override protocols. The notice emphasized procedural clarity in descent phases where system automation may require manual input or override. In response to international concern, the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, confirmed that it had received a full incident brief from the Indian government and was monitoring developments. ICAO issued no warnings or restrictions regarding Indian airspace or Air India operations. Globally, Boeing launched its own internal technical assessment team focused on reviewing aircraft performance data specific to the Indian fleet. There was no fleet-wide grounding or service bulletin issued internationally as of mid-June. Boeing's statement reiterated, "We are providing full support to the Indian authorities in their investigation. Safety remains our highest priority." The Boeing 787 Dreamliner has a strong operational record worldwide, and we will continue to cooperate transparently with all partners. Air India also began an internal audit of its flight operations, training protocols, and maintenance record-keeping. An internal task force was established, composed of senior engineers, operations directors, and quality assurance personnel. While no immediate procedural gaps had been found, the airline committed to re-examining every aspect of operations related to long-haul route planning, descent management, and cross-functional crew coordination. In the days that followed, civil aviation regulators in Japan, Qatar, Singapore, and Canada issued notices to their national carriers reminding them of adherence to flight data monitoring practices and event reporting systems. These were not directives linked to AI 171, but part of a global pattern of response following major aviation incidents. Back in Ahmedabad, all technical activity at the crash site continued under AAIB supervision. Key aircraft components were extracted, including portions of the primary flight control surfaces, engine turbine fragments, and digital avionics modules. These items were packed and shipped to authorized laboratories for metallurgical and electronic analysis. The final report from the AAIB remained pending, with a preliminary report expected within 30 days of the crash as per Indian regulations and ICAO guidelines. Until then, the technical community maintained its focus on gathering facts, understanding failure sequences, and ensuring that nothing remained unexamined. For the families who had lost loved ones, these technical reviews offered little immediate comfort. But in aviation, accountability often begins with the data. Each bolt, wire, and sensor is a witness. Each record tells part of the story. In the crash of Flight AI-171, that story was not yet fully told, but it was being documented, one verified step at a time. In the days that followed the crash of Air India Flight AI-171, the immediate shock gave way to the slower, more deliberate process of identifying victims and assisting families. With 241 lives lost on board and over 24 fatalities on the ground, the scale of the tragedy required a coordinated response across forensic, administrative, and humanitarian domains. By June 13, 2025, the process of recovering and identifying the remains had begun at two main centers in Ahmedabad, Civil Hospital and Sterling Hospital. Civil Hospital, one of the largest government medical facilities in Gujarat, served as the central site for managing victim identification. A dedicated forensic team, including pathologists, forensic odontologists, and representatives from the National Disaster Response Force, NDRF, was deployed to manage post-mortem procedures and evidence collection. The Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority, GSDMA, set up a temporary coordination hub within the civil hospital premises. This unit managed documentation intake from families, passport scans, medical records, recent photographs, and dental data to match against forensic records. According to statements by the Ahmedabad Municipal Commissioner, the process was structured as follows. Initial visual identification when possible, limited by the condition of remains. Secondary confirmation using dental records and medical markers. DNA sampling for cases where physical recognition was not feasible. A mobile DNA collection unit from Gujarat Forensic Sciences University was deployed to the site to assist in accelerating the matching process. Samples were also flown to labs in Hyderabad and New Delhi to reduce processing times. For the 28 confirmed fatalities on the ground, Civil Hospital coordinated with the Ahmedabad police and local ward offices to verify identities. Many of the deceased were residents of the housing clusters adjacent to the Gujarat University campus where the aircraft came down. Municipal records, Aadhaar card data, and school or employment documents were used to complete identifications. Community-level support began emerging in tandem. Multiple residential societies around University Road and CG Road opened their doors to displaced residents. An estimated 93 households were affected by the crash zone, with over 40 homes either completely destroyed or declared structurally unsafe by municipal engineers. Temporary housing was arranged at government-run hostels and community centers. Relief material, mattresses, dry food, medicines, was coordinated by both government agencies and NGOs. The Ahmedabad Urban Development Authority, UDA, began structural surveys of damaged properties, including residential apartments, retail shops, and one tuition center that had been partially impacted. No additional casualties were reported from buildings during these inspections, but electrical lines, water mains, and public infrastructure in the area required urgent repairs. The Ministry of Civil Aviation confirmed that families of deceased passengers would be compensated under Air India's liability obligations in accordance with the Montreal Convention. Air India opened dedicated family support desks in Ahmedabad, Delhi, and Mumbai, as well as contact points for relatives of foreign nationals. Across Ahmedabad, the human impact of the crash extended beyond the directly bereaved. In the Gujarat University area, educational institutions remained partially closed. Faculty at LD Engineering College, Gujarat University Department of Journalism, and MG Science Institute reported students among those grieving the loss of friends, neighbors, or relatives. Colleges opened counseling rooms staffed with clinical psychologists and suspended regular evaluations for affected students. Religious leaders from nearby temples, mosques, and gurdwaras initiated support programs. At Swaminarayan Mandir on Law Garden Road, a daily prayer was held in silence without bhajan accompaniment. The Jama Masjid Waqf Committee offered burial assistance to Muslim victims' families. Christian cemeteries in the city worked in coordination with municipal officials to allocate burial plots where needed. Outside of Ahmedabad, the impact spread through phone calls, travel, and waiting rooms in cities across India and abroad. Families arrived from Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Punjab, Delhi, West Bengal, and Uttar Pradesh. Among the deceased were Indian students, tourists, business professionals, and senior citizens returning from visiting relatives in Europe. Arrangements were made to accommodate multilingual support personnel at the hospital help desks. The government of India facilitated the repatriation of remains for foreign nationals, though no exact number of non-Indian citizens on board had been publicly confirmed. Foreign embassies in Delhi coordinated directly with the Ministry of External Affairs and the Ministry of Civil Aviation. Across Indian civil society, the event triggered a wave of organized support. Online donation drives, blood donation camps, and volunteer registration portals appeared within days. The Indian Red Cross Society, Siwa, and Gunj were among the organizations providing logistical or psychological assistance. The municipal corporation announced that the crash site area would remain closed to public access, until forensic and structural surveys were complete. Plans for a permanent memorial were not discussed publicly and remained under review by state authorities. The community around Gujarat University, long known for its education and civic activity, had become the center of an unprecedented event in the city's modern history. And although roads reopened and daily life slowly resumed, the long-term impact of June 12th remained present in classrooms, in homes, in places of worship, and in silence. The final phase of identification was expected to continue into the coming weeks, supported by interstate coordination, genetic analysis, and administrative documentation. For many families, the wait for answers was not yet over. But each day brought another step toward resolution. Not closure, but clarity. The crash of Air India flight I-171 on June 12, 2025, marked one of the gravest civil aviation disasters in the history of Indian commercial flight. It involved the loss of 241 lives on board, the death of 28 civilians on the ground, and significant disruption to the city of Ahmedabad. The accident, which occurred just 2 kilometers from Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel International Airport, unfolded in clear daylight. It was recorded, responded to, and remembered not just by those present, but by institutions across the country and abroad. The civil hospital in Ahmedabad remained the central hub for victim identification, medical response, and family coordination. Multiple DNA identification efforts, some extending across states and international borders, were underway to complete the matching process for all deceased. The sole survivor of the crash, Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, was reported to be in stable condition as of the last confirmed hospital bulletin. He had been seated in 11A and survived by escaping through a compromised section of the aircraft's fuselage. A national day of mourning was declared by the Government of India on June 13th, one day after the crash. Flags flew at half-mast. Public statements were made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, and regional leaders. Air India, in coordination with the ministry, opened support desks for victims' families and began processing legal and insurance documentation. At the site of the crash, basic cleanup had begun. Aircraft components were carefully cataloged and removed for analysis. The street adjacent to the impact zone remained closed. No official announcement regarding a memorial or site designation had been made by the government at the time of this report. The international aviation community responded in procedural solidarity. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, was briefed on developments. Foreign embassies coordinated to assist the families of international passengers. Aviation authorities in multiple countries issued notices to review flight safety systems, and Boeing's internal review team remained engaged. From an operational standpoint, air travel in and out of Ahmedabad resumed under normal schedules. The airport remained fully functional, and airspace restrictions were lifted within 36 hours of the crash. No subsequent flight diversions due to safety concerns were recorded. As of the final week of June 2025, the crash investigation will enter its mid-stage. Data analysis, crew profiling, systems correlation, and maintenance history audits. A preliminary report from the AAIB is scheduled to be released within 30 days of the crash, as mandated by Indian Civil Aviation Protocol. The final report, which would include probable cause, contributing factors, and safety recommendations, is expected later in the year. India's commercial aviation sector, one of the fastest growing in the world, continued to operate under heightened safety monitoring. The Civil Aviation Ministry confirmed that no systemic disruptions were anticipated. Air India resumed long-haul operations, including Milan-Delhi services, with alternate aircraft. The families and communities affected by the crash continued to navigate legal, emotional, and logistical paths toward recovery. Support structures remained in place, including helplines, legal aid, psychological support, and administrative counseling. There were no memorial events organized at scale in the weeks following the crash. Instead, remembrance unfolded privately, in homes, in places of worship, in student gatherings, and in quiet moments near the crash site. Some buildings near Gujarat University displayed black banners, others kept balconies unlit. The story of Flight AI-171 remains a matter of ongoing record. Every verified detail, each piece of recovered data, every confirmed name, every procedural step, is part of that record. It belongs to the passengers, the crew, the civilians on the ground, the responders, and the institutions working toward understanding and prevention. The lives lost in the crash have been acknowledged with official condolences, formal action, and personal grief. No assumption, theory, or interpretation replaces the factual work being conducted by investigators and public agencies. As India awaits the results of the investigation, and as families continue to seek closure, the country moves forward with a sober reminder of aviation's responsibilities. Each flight carries not only passengers, but the duty of safety, vigilance, and preparedness. To the families of the victims, those who were lost on board and those on the ground, this record stands not as a substitute for mourning, but as a clear, verified, and respectful chronicle of what occurred. Air India Flight AI-171, Milan to Delhi to Ahmedabad, June 12, 2025. Final approach. Final record.